Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first edition of Tsipolitics, where the T is silent, but the truth is not. My first guest is a childhood friend of mine, one of the best political minds I know, hailing from the great town of Wayland, Massachusetts. Hugh Jones joins the show this week. Hugh, how are you?
I'm wonderful. It's a pleasure to be on. Thank you for having me.
All right, Hugh, let's jump right into it because you are the man behind a really cool project I've seen on social media recently. It is called the Decency Project. Why don't you tell everyone what the Decency Project is, what its mission is, and how it came about?
I appreciate that. So the Decency Project is a fully digital grassroots movement that some friends and I, mostly at UVA, although we're starting to grow elsewhere, started. In response to the fact that because of COVID-19 and social distancing, this has become the digital election, right? You can't have a campaign do anything in person. Historically, campaigns would use this moment to go canvass door to door, right? They have big in-person rallies. Having seen Joe Biden in person, I can tell you he's a lot more compelling when you're right there than he is across a screen, especially from his basement where he's doing a lot of his broadcasting these days. So in response to the reality that we're now facing, we were thinking a lot about how can you continue to run a strong campaign in cyberspace, right? On Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, where all of us spend our time. That is the new public square. And we actually reached out to a person on the Biden campaign who I had the privilege of doing a little work with and said, here's some ideas. I'd love to volunteer for you. My summer internship plans got canceled thanks to COVID-19. I've got some time on my hands. Very passionate about this issue and would love to help out. And they were enthusiastic about the idea, but never really followed through on it. So the Decency Project is essentially taking that and us saying, okay, we're going to, it's cyberspace. Anyone can contribute however they'd like. We don't need the formal backing of the campaign to do what we think needs to be done. And we're kind of launching it from there. So we're actually, I don't know if you've heard of the Lincoln Project. Have you heard of that?
I love the Lincoln Project.
Okay.
I think every morning my brother and I send each other Lincoln Project videos, and they're amazing.
The Lincoln Project fires me up. My friend Adam, who I started this with, he and I were watching some of these videos, and like you, just love them. They're super fun. They're super engaging. They're pithy, super creative, and they're really thoughtful attacks on Trump. And we were thinking, this is wonderful. I don't know if you know this, but the Lincoln Project is actually formally targeted at Republicans who are morally or just politically disaligned with Trump, right? Because the party's realigned so drastically in the span of the last 4 years. So we were thinking, what if we could take that model that they have shown can be done so well? Obviously, we're far fewer in the way of resources than they have. They're a pretty high-profile deal at this point. What if we could take that model and essentially target our demographic, which is college age, left-leaning, extremely idealistic young people who aren't necessarily fired up about Joe Biden for a number of reasons. And there are some obvious, everyone has a personal reason why they are not fired up about Joe Biden. And if you talk to people these days, particularly in our group, as I'm sure you do, it's lukewarm at best. And that should be a problem. We should see that as a problem because we are in the election against Donald Trump, who we could, as the Lincoln Project does, we can list a zillion things that the guy continues to mess up on. If you're looking at a competence standpoint, you can look at his moral stances, which are about as immoral as they come, in my view. How do you, if you're running a candidate like Joe Biden, how do you stand out in this environment? And so again, our goal is fundamentally to produce content, spread messaging designed to remind people that this election, unlike many elections, is not very complicated. This is a pretty binary decision in our view. We don't think it's very complicated, right? There's Donald Trump on one hand and his backwards policies, pick your issue, right? You could have racial justice, you could have climate justice, you could have student debt, you could have coronavirus and public health. Pick your issue, wealth inequality. Donald Trump consistently comes down on the wrong side on all of those issues. He is backwards. And Joe Biden, again, people don't give him enough credit for this. If you look at his policies and what he's coming out with, he's pretty darn progressive on these same issues. So we're trying to get the message out to people our age who are not fired up about him, who are saying, oh, I might protest and write in Bernie in my ballot. I might vote for the Green Party. It's time to show up and vote for the right thing here. It's a binary decision. It is black and white. Many things in life aren't. This thing happens to be. Let's get out there and do the right thing and vote this guy the hell out.
I mean, look, I'm definitely your key target audience. I'm a college age voter. I'm very engaged in politics, but I'm not thrilled on Biden. Not because I'm like on the very far left or supporting Bernie. I was originally a Pete Buttigieg supporter, but I
They're
mean
feeling
back in 2016, even though I technically I couldn't vote because I was like 3 weeks too young. I still wanted to back a candidate, and a lot of people know I was a John Kasich supporter. I really
I
don't.
remember that. You were outspoken about that, actually.
Yeah, I
The
because
only person I know actually who supported John Kasich.
I mean, maybe some people should have listened to what I had to say, but that's okay. That's in the past. But yeah, like I don't technically identify with one party or another. I have my political views, I have my values, and they are not aligned with Trump. But I will say this: I'm not totally thrilled with Biden, but I mean, your project and the Lincoln Project, it gets me really fired up to vote this dude out of office because I mean, there's some things I don't know a lot about, but I do know a lot about competence and incompetence, and I know I know incompetence when I see it. But I wanted
And
to get in.
that's the starting point we're working off here, right? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah,
Just
no
to add,
worries.
like, this is not a complicated thing. Like, you can see incompetence. We're working this whole discussion for you, our purposes, you and I. Um, we can agree that Trump is just a disaster. Obviously, there are places where that's being debated, and there are people who very strongly disagree with that. But we're talking about within the large circle of people who see that this guy is ridiculously incompetent, and backwards and problematic on every issue he tries to tackle or does not try to tackle. In the case of the virus, we America come out worse because of it, and he actively divides us along the way. So it's in light of that, obviously, just to build on what you're saying, that we're spreading the message that we're spreading.
So I wanted to get into your support of Joe Biden because you were a supporter of Joe Biden before it was kind of whittled down to just Joe Biden or just Biden or Bernie. You were a supporter very early on, and just as someone who was supporting a candidate like Buttigieg who didn't get a ton of traction, who I wish I got more traction, I definitely gravitated more towards Biden than Bernie, but I'll be totally honest with you. I think you are one of the few people I know who was really going with Biden early on within the primary. So I was wondering I'm just wondering why Biden was your guy so early on.
A lot of people have asked about that. I'm pretty outspoken about him. I definitely was at the outset. I was way before we got clobbered in Iowa, and then got clobbered in New Hampshire, and Nevada, for that matter. And had to deal with a lot of self-doubt, I think, at that point about the choice I'd made. But I'm glad to see that it's kind of followed through so nicely for him. I think, honestly, if I could have picked any one of the Democratic candidates at the outset who I would have preferred to see in the Oval Office, that would have been Elizabeth Warren. I thought she had the perspective that best mirrored my own, toward the problems this country is facing, particularly the issues of structural, racial, gender-based, and wealth-based inequality, right? And those are all intersectional, obviously. They all overlap with each other. And her solutions, I thought, were spot on. I also loved her focus on regulating Silicon Valley and big tech, which is another area I'm fascinated by and I think really needs to be more thoroughly discussed. And she was one of the people early on who really took on Mark Zuckerberg. So much so that Mark Zuckerberg said that he was worried about a Warren presidency. I love that. And I'm hopeful, maybe 2024, who knows, there'll be an opportunity for a candidate like that to get into the Oval Office. My Biden support was based on a simple calculation that I did, that given where the country is right now, and again, we're not playing the popular vote, we're playing the electoral college. We tried that in 2016, and Hillary won the popular vote by 2.8 million votes, and we're stuck with the orange man still. So at this point, the calculation for Biden was very simple in that it comes down to who, given the landscape, given the state of our discourse and our affairs right now, who could pull through and beat Trump. Again, based on the premise that beating Trump is more important than anything else at this point. We just need some competence. We need some decency back in the Oval Office. And I actually got super involved when I made that decision. I gave it some thought. Again, arrived at Biden, I think, fundamentally the socialist label, as much as I agree with the moral vision behind it, I think the socialist label is a damaging thing in this context. And I think a lot of the people in this country, particularly older people outside of our demographic, hear that word and they freeze up. And they think of references that are obviously not really the substance of what we're talking about necessarily, but those references have an impact anyways. They think of Venezuela, right? They think of communist China. Obviously, those are not, there are complications to those references, but people have this kind of boogeyman in their head. They think of Russia, right, when they hear the term socialism in America, particularly those who went through the Red Scare. So how do you beat someone as bad as Trump in an election like that? You run someone who honestly maybe is a little boring, right? Who's very decent, who does not add fuel to the fire fundamentally of division. And I think I'm actually satisfied with what we've gotten in Biden. I think he's, again, a highly imperfect person. There are a lot of complications with him, with his voting history. I think those can be made complex when you look at them under a microscope. It's not a black and white thing, as many people on the left who criticize him would like to make you think. Like Joe Biden has been consistently, I believe, trying to do his best to push this country in what he sees as a positive direction. I think he's extremely committed to that as it relates to 2020. He is the man for the moment, I believe. If there's anyone who can pull it off against Trump, he's got to be the one. So I went to Iowa to work for him. Actually, I was a precinct captain for Joe Biden in Cedar Rapids early on. We came in second in my precinct, but fourth overall in Iowa. It was a rough show. There was a lot of energy for Bernie and a lot of energy for Pete, and it was palpable and it was exciting. And there were points where I certainly felt like I wished I could be a part of that. And I wasn't, and we lost. And we saw the same thing happen in New Hampshire, obviously, and Nevada. So it was a tough start, and definitely a lot of moments, like I said, where I was unsure that he would be our guy. But I'm glad he pulled through. I don't know what your thoughts were on the initial kind of field of Democratic candidates, but was there someone you would have loved to have seen who we didn't see?
I mean, I was Buttigieg very early on, and I was Buttigieg until he dropped out. I saw something in him that was just very, very refreshing. I saw someone young. I saw someone with a lot of energy. I saw someone who was so well spoken and just so clear in everything that he was saying. And I thought the same thing too, was who would have the best shot at beating Donald Trump. And I got a lot of slack saying, well, Pete Buttigieg being gay, no one's gonna vote for him. My whole process of thinking was, the people who would not vote for a gay president aren't going to vote for a Democrat president. That was my thought. And I think
he had a really strong start in Iowa, by the way. And I'm sure you saw that.
Yeah. And I remember watching his speech after Iowa, and I thought at the time when I was watching that, it was kind of like, that Hillary Clinton ad of the kids like sitting on the carpet watching TV and like looking at their candidate. And that was me. I was sitting on the couch and I was so proud. And then it just so quickly turned around. But I mean, I'm still hopeful that maybe not Pete specifically, but someone like that. And I also think him being a veteran, him actually fighting for our country, going up against someone who dodged the draft.
It's powerful from an optics standpoint.
And someone who is, and honestly, I thought on the debate stage during his speeches, I just thought he was such a great public speaker that there would be such a clear divide between who would win debates. I thought Buttigieg would be a guy who would just wipe the floor in a debate with Donald Trump. But a lot of people didn't see it that way. And honestly, I mean, hey, we're in a democracy. And I respect it.
It's a broken democracy.
It's a flawed democracy. It's a democracy in which, like you're saying, this is a very black and white decision. And I totally agree with you. This is not the time to vote third party. It's not the time to write people in. But at the same time, as someone who values democracy, I think of that and I literally think to myself, this kind of sucks. Like, it doesn't really feel very, very democratic to me, where it's like, okay, I have to choose between two. I can't choose third. There can't be a fourth person. Like, I'm pretty center left. I didn't agree with a lot of people who are voting for Bernie, but I mean, they should at least deserve something. a person they could vote for without being attacked from both sides of the political spectrum. And people in the center right who might want to vote third party shouldn't be getting attacked on
I will say,
each side of the spectrum.
Sorry to interrupt. I was going to just add, as it relates to the kind of Bernie Sanders perspective and making sure that perspective is included in the discussion. Biden is working. He's got the Sanders-Biden Unity Task Force underway. AOC is on board among high-profile members. So there is a group for sure who is looking to, given the unfortunate constraints of the way our electoral system works, to take those views, which are represented there in at least a significant plurality of the population, and make sure that those are factored into what's going on. I just wanted to add that. And Biden, obviously being moderate by brand, obviously has an ability to reach out to those in the center right probably as well. And with his middle-class background, he's firmly a capitalist. A lot of people see that as a positive, others see that as a negative thing, but he does have this capacity, I think, in a unique way to bridge a lot of boundaries that have appeared very rigid to us in recent years.
And he's got my boy John Kasich, who's going to be speaking
at the DNC.
And I know a lot of people are kind of surprised by this, but looking back, I'm really not, because when I went to my first ever political event was a John Kasich rally in New Hampshire, February of 2015. It was Super Bowl Sunday. I remember that. And because I was wearing my Carolina Panthers jersey.
The fact that he got you to a rally on Super Bowl Sunday is unbelievable.
It worked out perfect. One of my best friends in New Hampshire is also a Panthers fan. So even though the Panthers lost, it was a nice little, killing two birds with one stone. It was great. And I got a selfie with John Kasich, but I digress. I remember him speaking about why we can't afford to elect Donald Trump as president. And he brought up the same word, decency. And he talked about how someone like that is going to cause such a divide that there's going to be such a lack of decency that even your neighbors who disagree with you somewhat politically, not so far right politically, where there's some people who are just like, oh yeah, like, I don't think homosexuals get married, and basic human rights. I'm not talking about that shit. I'm talking about just, you vote Democrat, I vote Republican. Let's just come together and have a conversation. Kasich said 5 years ago, if Donald Trump's in office, that's not going to exist. There's going to be such a divide. And I will never not be friends with someone based on their political views. I always want to have a discussion, whether they be far left, right, whatever. But he was right. Like, it's so hard to just come together and just at least have a dialogue and a conversation. And social media just being a safe place to say whatever the hell you want with little repercussion, just some of the darkest of the dark shit that can be posted. It's gut-wrenching. And I really hope that Kasich can be a guy who says we need some decency. And this is a guy who's like me. He's not gonna vote for the party he's aligned with. He's gonna vote for who he aligns with, what his values align with, and his values are decency. And he's gonna go with the person who brings decency.
I think that's really well put. And I loved your point as well about, think about what Trump has been to our national discourse, our ability to discuss things with each other in a way in which discussion, like a back and forth of ideas, is even possible. He's been like a weed whacker, right? I mean, he's inflicted, you could call it neurological. If America were kind of brain, it's a weird analogy, like a neural network, he's inflicted neurological damage. We're not well, right? Like on the fabric of the country. In terms of like the information channels, like people being able to engage with people who differ from them. And I agree, that's one of the most important things that we're fighting for in this election. And 4 more years of Trump would, I think, definitely position us to lose that. And I think, I don't know what you think about Trump's character, but I think part of what's interesting about Trump and why he is such a problem and such a, again, fuel on the fire when it comes to exacerbating the divisions that already exist in this country, because he is so extreme in his indecency, but he represents a certain portion of the political spectrum politically, right? People who share the political stance that he has, but don't love his tweets, for example, who maybe plug their noses and go vote for him and maybe will occasionally say something in support of him every now and then. That divides us further because suddenly they're forced to kind of embrace who he is and what he's about. it's hard to separate yourself from the policy and the person, right? To say like, this is Donald Trump, the policy I support. This is Donald Trump, the individual who I'm supporting for president. And it's had a similar effect on the left as well, right? Like, with the left has such a visceral disdain for, I feel that disdain is mine as well. I can't look at the guy without an immediate gut reaction that I hate everything he's about and everything he's about to say, which gets in the way again of assessing the ideas and having a conversation. When both sides see the guy and one of them sees him as a kind of shrine of what they stand for, and their political stances, right? And the other sees him as the antithesis of everything they've ever stood for, morally, politically, whatever it might be. We can't really talk with each other. So he is like this grand block that comes in the middle and says, you can't talk to so-and-so can't speak with you. You guys you don't live in the same world, and you don't share enough values to have that discussion. And like you said, if we need people like John Kasich out there, fundamentally, people like Joe Biden, I believe, saying, let's step back a second. Like, we can't do anything if we can't talk to each other. And what you need to start there is decency. You need a set of norms that say, I can talk with you. We might have our differences, but we can chat, we can get things done, we can work together. And that's how we're going to do it. Laws don't get passed without that.
It's crazy how Trump also just keeps wedging that divide with people he puts in positions of power. Like, my big thing, I'm very passionate towards education. I cannot take his education policy seriously when our Secretary of Education doesn't believe in public education. I cannot take his administration seriously when he throws Peter Navarro on CNN and he's saying the most outlandish things that I can see Jake Tapper like twitching, having a migraine, and I'm eating cereal at 10 a.m. on a Sunday going, oh, poor Jake. Oh, you deserve a week off just for listening to Navarro for 10 minutes.
And the place is tearing itself apart over there. I mean, Navarro came out, obviously, and bashed Fauci, apparently at Trump's urging. I mean, there have been bashing his own guy leading the response to the biggest public health crisis this country's seen in 100 years.
Well, so this brings me into a segment I'm introducing. Is called,
I was thinking about that,
IAESTS, which stands for, is anyone else seeing this shit? Because I've had so many of those moments, especially during the last month. I'm going to tell you I think the biggest one I had, his speech at Mount Rushmore, 4th of July. And he's given a little rundown of everyone who's up there. And he gets to Abe Lincoln. And he spends like 5 to 10 minutes on Abe Lincoln and the Civil War, and not once mentions the Confederacy. Like, he's just saying, and the Union soldiers who fought the Civil War. And I'm just sitting there going, against, and he keeps going. And I'm watching this with my dad, but I'm still looking around. There's a group around, and I'm like, is anyone seeing this shit? And then like 2 days later,
horrifying,
I'm watching just clips on Twitter, and I see a clip of Tucker Carlson saying, and I quote, how can Donald Trump be racist? He literally praised Abraham Lincoln without even mentioning the Confederacy. Like, how can he be racist? It doesn't bring up the Confederacy.
Citing the fact that he didn't bring up the Confederacy in the clip.
Yes, this was Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson said, how can Donald Trump be racist? He didn't even mention the Confederacy in his speech about Abraham Lincoln. I spat out my coffee, and I'm just like, oh, how is he spinning it like that? And people bought it. And I'm looking around in an empty kitchen, like, is anyone else seeing this shit? So I was wondering if you have had any one of those. Is anyone else seeing this shit moments?
Oh, too many to count. You've gotten to the point where I start blocking them out. It's like, oh, I hope someone else saw this shit, because I certainly did. And that was today's shit that I saw. Actually, that was the shit I saw this hour, but what shit might I see next hour? I mean, again, I think the Fauci attack for me, I can't believe, can we just touch on that for a second? The fact that the guy gave a speech at Mount Rushmore on the 4th of July. That was, I mean, is anyone else seeing this shit? Like, in a really scary, and again, it's on one hand, it's like, we should be scratching our heads. Like, is that like, this is ridiculous. Is this a satire of some kind? But on other, it's really freaking scary. I mean, this speech he gave was among the most divisive, aggressive, fundamentally racist, problematic, overly simplistic, in a blatantly false way, political speeches a president, I think, has ever given. And the fact that he did that, had the gall to do that, standing under the faces on Mount Rushmore on the 4th of July, is mind-boggling to me. And again, I think it shows he'll stoop to. There's no low that's too low for Donald Trump to stoop down to.
I got such a weird, like, kind of authoritarian vibe during that speech. He even brought up totalitarianism. He couldn't pronounce it, which I found very funny. But like, I'm just like, this is sounding very kind of authoritarian-y. Like I know he's buddies with Erdogan in Turkey, but he's kind of tapping into that playbook. And then this past week, you have federal troops swooping up people in Portland going, oh, wow, he's really tapping into that Erdogan playbook. Like, bashing the media and making other races and other political values the enemy and sending in federal troops to stop protests. Like, that's literally how to be authoritarian 101.
And you've heard the way he talks about authoritarian leaders around the world. I mean, he praises these people and talks about how he sees elements of himself in them. He thinks they've got a lot in common, that he can work with these leaders. Not to say that he is necessarily a full-on fascist, but a proto-fascist, perhaps, like, got those tendencies. You can tell his worldview, and it's a scary thing. And imagine 4 more years of that, right? Like, you don't have to stand to get reelected. Imagine with lacking that constraint, what Donald Trump might do with the highest office in the country.
Okay, in terms of a peaceful transition of power, and I'm hoping, I'm under the assumption that he will lose just based on all these polls I'm looking at, all these states. He is losing. He's kind of been playing, trying to change his image a little bit this week, and
he's clamped down on the divisiveness, that Mount Rushmore speech, in an attempt to kind of bully his way through.
Yeah, and so, but let's just say that he ends up losing the election. First off, I think the whole attack on mail-in voting has just been, I'm not going to say when, I'll still say if he loses, then he can go and say, we have to recount because fraud in mail-in voting. Because if he made that up on the spot, even Republican voters would go, come on, that's ridiculous. But he has now convinced a large population of the country going, yeah, see, he said mail-in voting, and look what happened. Like, we got to recount.
And by the way, he and his vice president, we should note, both vote by mail frequently. They voted 2 months ago. He voted 2 months ago from Florida by mail.
And so here's what I think what would happen if he loses. He's going to pull out that card, and then people are going to protest outside the White House, and then he's going to do whatever. Because this is the dude who tear-gassed protesters outside the White House because people said, hey, you went into a bunker because you were scared. And he was like, I'm not scared. And then tear-gas protesters for a photo op by a church. Jesus. Imagine this dude, protesters outside the White House the night he loses an election. Like, that scares me. And if he tear-gasses those protesters, like, that's not a peaceful transition of power. There's not going to be a full-on coup, war, whatever, but there's going to be something like that will really make us question the strength of our democracy.
I worry about that too. I mean, I don't worry as much about, there are a lot of people with the Civil War narrative, right? Like, we're gonna reach a Civil War type breaking point. It's going to be a total battle of the cultures. I think the culture wars will continue, and I think protests outside the White House will definitely be super scary and ugly. I mean, they already were, like you pointed out, right? And I think we're all watching him play the whole vote by mail delegitimizing move a mile away, right? Like, everyone's watching now and listening to what he says and realizing that he's setting up the ground to say, this is an illegitimate election. I don't accept these results, recount. We saw it in House of Cards, season 4, right? When they tried to, they beat Conway. I don't know if you've seen House of Cards. Used to be a favorite show of mine. I think it went down the drain, but
yeah, I have not seen House of Cards, but I don't know. I think Kevin Spacey was democratically removed from that show.
Yeah, and canceled for really good reason. But that was a smart move for them to get rid of him from the show. I think that was the right thing to do. But on a separate note, I mean, his
what a weird turn that took.
Yeah, his authoritarian character, essentially, who he plays as the president, creates mass confusion and essentially runs a voter suppression effort amid the craziness of a need for a recount and closed polling places. And I do think that is a very scary, very real scenario. I mean, we've seen already, there are states, I don't know if you saw this, Kentucky and Georgia both had primaries in the last 2 months. And both states have seen, especially in predominantly inner city, predominantly African-American districts, have seen what anyone watching would call voter suppression tactics being deployed. These are a lot of locations closing down, ridiculously long lines at other places in the middle of a pandemic, right? These are for the people who are showing up in person. This obviously has nothing to do with mail-in. In Kentucky, they made people wait 3 to 4 hours at certain places. Actually, some of them probably more than that. And then closed the polls. Said, "Well, you can't, like, you didn't get inside in time. You can't vote." And actually, one of the candidates, Charles Booker, actually filed an injunction to get those back open, and they won, and they kept the polls open until 9. But that's going to be the kind of thing, particularly in Republican-controlled states, that we do need to worry about as it relates to the legitimacy of this election outcome. Given the virus and the craziness and the mail-in stuff, everything that's going on that enables a chaos monger like Trump to come in and make an issue, I think we do need to worry about people showing up to polling locations and them not having an opening for them, right? Like not letting you in. Sorry, you couldn't get in time. Locations being closed strategically in districts, essentially disincentivizing people who didn't do the mail-in ballots to show up. That's something we got to worry about. And if you're the general counsel for the Biden campaign, you've got your hands full, because that is going to happen all over the place. And if Trump gets away with that, then I think there's good reason to say that there is a very legitimate election result. I'm not one for calling foul on that, right? You don't cry wolf on that. That's a serious, serious allegation. But this is a serious, serious election. And this is stuff that we've seen already in primaries. So we got to worry about it when it comes to November.
All right, let's end this on some good vibes. Hugh Jones, what is something that you are hopeful for?
It's a good question.
I know it's a big ask right now, but there's got to be something.
It's a big ask. I'm hopeful we can get back. I'd say back on track, but that sounds like we have to return to something. Like there's some kind of normalcy, right, that we need to go back to. And that normalcy that some people think Joe Biden represents, I don't think he does, was a problem to begin with. It's the problem that got Trump elected to begin with. I'm hopeful we'll come out of this obviously a little roughed up as a country. This has not been an easy 4 years. It's been super divisive, but I'm hopeful we can turn a corner and recognize that mode of politics that Trump really represents the culmination of, right? That's not the way forward. And if we can just get Biden and I think he's going to have an absolutely incredible team in his cabinet. If we can get them into the executive, I think we're in good shape. So I am hopeful for the kind of America that could exist. And I think, again, we're going to need some serious. This is going to be a crazy few years. If you look at the fallout from coronavirus, we're going to have a lot of work to do. But I do think, if handled correctly and if taken full advantage of, we could come back stronger and be a better place, a more just place, in the sense that we've made opportunities more widely available to people, a safer place, a healthier place than we were when we went into this. So that's my hope. What about you? We're bashing these guys, but I like the optimistic bent.
Ooh, my hope, kind of along the same lines. You're totally right. If we go back to the place we were before Donald Trump, what does that actually solve? Because there's clearly something that got us here in the first place. There might not be a sense of normalcy, but there will be a realization that what we went through, not just the last 4 years, but especially this fourth year, like that cannot happen again. I've brought up democracy a lot. I'm very hopeful that our democracy will kind of, I don't want to say like strengthen, but I'm actually going to say that strengthen in a bit of a revival. I hope there'll be a better understanding of what democracy actually means to this country, and people have a better understanding of what's been going on should not reflect who we are. And as someone who's passionate about international relations and our allies, I'm really hopeful that our European allies, our allies across the world, will actually take us seriously again, and we can be cooperative and not be a laughing stock. And I'm hopeful that I can actually be, I hate to say it, be proud to be an American, because I'm obviously proud to be a U.S. citizen, but goddamn, there are times where I'm ashamed. Like when I was studying abroad in New Zealand, and I'm seeing all this stuff going on, and I feel kind of embarrassed. And I know it sucks, but I always, when you criticize Donald Trump and you have people going like, you hate America, you're not patriotic, I see it the other way. I think I'm very patriotic. I love this country so much that I know we can be better. So I'm hopeful that people can realize that we can be better, and saying and criticizing America's flaws doesn't make you not patriotic. If anything, it makes you more patriotic because you want this to be better. You want it to be the best that it can be.
I think your patriotism is spot on. And I think especially we had the 4th of July recently, we saw a lot of people coming out with their red, white, and blue, America, fuck yeah, got the fireworks going, red, white, and blue again. That's not what patriotism looks like. Patriotism is criticizing your country. There's a great James Baldwin quote about how I love America endlessly, so I must criticize her endlessly. I might have botched that slightly, but that's the takeaway. And it's the people who took to the streets, right, to protest the injustices that have obviously stained this country literally forever through its entire history. It's people like you, again, who believe that we can and should be better than we are, that make this country special. And we can't discount that, because that in and of itself is an incredible thing. And that's what this country has going for it. I totally agree. And I'm hopeful that this has been, again, a very ugly 4 years, and especially these last few months have just been, I feel like it's all coming to a head. I'm hopeful that we can get through this with a lot more perspective, like you said, and a renewed appreciation for what it means to be patriotic, what it means to contribute, and what America, again, like you said, what America can be. I love that. Last question, I've got one for you if you've got a few more seconds.
Yeah, I'm totally down.
Awesome. Do you think that people in New Zealand I'm just curious, how do people in New Zealand, given your time there, look at the politics in this country? Obviously, they're one of the countries that's gotten a lot of publicity up front for their really good job handling the coronavirus outbreak. What's the political situation look like over there? And I guess, how do people consider what's going on over here?
As compared to the United States, their response has been amazing, but I talk to my friends in New Zealand all the time, and they're even somewhat critical of their own response because they think, hey, like, we could have done better. And for America, we say, oh, like, they've done such a great job, but their standards are not our standards. And I think it's the same thing politically. I think being a parliamentary system in such a small country, it's a lot easier for them to perhaps not, I don't want to say agree, but like when I say, like, having these discussions. And one big thing I noticed was a lot of the young people are the ones who set the tone for policies. You see a lot of young people who, especially because I went to school in the capital, and there's some people who they will graduate from Victoria University Wellington, and then right away they're super involved within Parliament. One of my best friends from New Zealand, she's big into law and women's rights and environmental law, all this. And I know, like, the second she graduates, even before she graduates, like, she's going to be like helping write laws, because it's not an old man's game there. And I think, and especially since Trump, they kind of just view us, from my perspective, I don't want to say they laugh at us, because a lot of the time if we crack jokes, I'll laugh along, but I don't think they take us as seriously as when, say, Obama was president. And I seriously don't blame them. I mean, I love the Scandinavian countries. I've been to the Faroe Islands, who Mike Pompeo just met with their prime minister, and I want to text the prime minister in the Faroe Islands. By the way, he has an open door policy. You can just walk into that office, I found out. I just want to go back and walk in and just be like, hey, just to let you know, like, you shouldn't be learning from him. Like, you teach him some stuff, all right? And I remember when Trump got mad at Denmark because they wouldn't offer themselves Greenland. And it's just like, what are you talking about? Like, that would be like, do you know how mad you get if Denmark's like, hey, you want the panhandle of Florida? Like, make an offer. Like, no. It's silly shit like that we've been doing to our allies for the last 4 years. And like, if I was a New Zealand citizen who doesn't live in the US, I'm only seeing what we are projecting, then I would just say, what the hell is going on over there? I would be shocked. I would kind of laugh. And I seriously don't blame them, because what I'm trying to get at is like, this is the image we are projecting. And it's like I said, I want to be hopeful with.
It's
like,
great.
I want to change the image that we're giving off to the world, because we cannot say touting we're number one and running around and praising our democracy and everything about this when we're not being taken seriously. Like, let's tone it back a little bit, change how the way people view us, and maybe, just maybe, we could apologize to Denmark for the whole Greenland thing, because I love Denmark and I want to have a better relationship with them. But that's kind of what I'm getting at. It's I seriously don't blame them if a European or someone from New Zealand looks at the U.S. and just kind of laughs or scoffs, just being like what the hell.
No, nor would I, given the circumstances and what we're projecting to the world right now, like you said. And I really like your point about sitting back and listening and learning from other countries, which and just from other people, period, which is something I think it's ironic that we're talking on a podcast right now. But we're listening to each other. So in that way, we're setting, I guess, a decent example. But I think especially white, privileged America, the America that for a long time has had the privilege of having politics work for it, because it's been the power structure, right? Like, time to step back and do some listening. And again, that is the power structure that then goes and steps out onto the world stage and makes the kind of mistakes that we're seeing being made all around the clock. So I'm hopeful, like you, that we could be better about that, but it's going to take a culture shift. And just maybe this November will give us a window to do that.
All right, Hugh, before I let you go, where can the people find the Decency Project and how can they get involved?
You're awesome. We've got a website that just went up earlier this week. It's decencyproject.us. Very simple. And we actually have literally a link that says get involved on our page. So you go to that website, again, decencyproject.us, and click the link. And we'd love to have you. We're doing something really cool on social media. Again, given that this is the digital election and that's where we're playing, we've got something interesting coming along, and we're hoping this will be widespread. So if you want to join us and partake, again, this is a grassroots thing. It's open to everybody. We want everybody. Please join us. That'd be a treat. And Peter, this has been fun chatting with you. We're overdue for this kind of stuff. It's good to hear your voice. You guys should see his face. He's looking great over here with his Arizona hat. And the mic setup. It's fun. It's good to see you, man.
Okay, thanks so much for coming on. Let's have you again.
Appreciate it. That'd be fun. Take care.